Which starter returning from injury should be in your lineups this week? Home favorite will be without their top two receivers. Who's going to soak up those targets? And should you pay up for Todd Gurley this week? We'll answer all those questions and more on the Footballguys Daily Fantasy Power Grid. I'm your host, Austin Lee. I'm joined by John Lee, Devin Knotts, and Ryan Hester. And during the next hour, we're going to get you ready for the Week 6 main slate on DraftKings and on FanDuel. Before we dive in position by position, we're going to talk to John about Vegas and see what those spreads and totals are telling us this week. John, what do you see?
Vegas value chart is screaming with a couple of games. Atlanta, Tampa Bay, 57.5 points total. Neither one of these teams have done anything on defense all season long, and now they go up against one another. You guys are talking about whether or not Todd Gurley is the play this week. I want to know, is Julio Jones the play?
No.
Devin always question.
Yeah, I mean, if he didn't do it last week, I don't know. We'll talk more about that. But, I mean, keeping in line with this, the LA Rams, they're a 7-point road favorite over Denver. Denver, traditionally a really strong defense, not so much this season. So it's a really intriguing option with Todd Gurley at $10,000. We'll talk about that in just a bit. Cincinnati and Pittsburgh, traditionally these AFC North games are very low scoring. That is no longer the case. There's not much defense going on there. And then from there we have two big favorites. Minnesota playing at home against Arizona and Houston at home against Buffalo. Both of those teams, interesting running back defense stacks if you wanted to run those in tournaments. Both of those have fairly high implied team totals, 26.5, 25.5. And then, as I said, you could run them back with defenses because the implied team totals for Arizona, Buffalo, super low. Young quarterbacks in hostile environments against good defenses. There's some pretty interesting things this week across this Vegas value chart.
Yeah, we've got some nice things to pick from. I don't see any big injury issues with quarterbacks this week. So I'm going to pitch it right to you, Ryan. Who do you like at quarterback this week? Do you have a guy that's high on your list for cash games, high on your list for GPPs? Who are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean, we'll just kind of start, with the obvious. The chalk is Jameis Winston. I mean, John alluded to the game being one of the highest totals on the board. Atlanta hasn't been able to stop anything that anyone does. Winston's back. The weapons are there. The team can't run so far this year. So the production will come through him, and they are expected to score a lot of points. So you would think that a lot of those points would come from Jameis Winston passing touchdowns. I don't know if I'm really sold. I mean, to me, more attractive than the matchup is the price tag, especially on DraftKings, the 5,800. It is hard to go much higher than that at quarterback and then feel really good about the rest of the lineup. So I'm kind of starting with Winston, but I'm reserving the right to go ahead and change that later as injury news comes out and between now and Sunday. But yeah, I mean, he's definitely the chalk right now, knowing what we know, and he's probably the cash game guy. At GPP, there's more, but I'll let the other guys kind of contribute in and flash some yellow or red as we go.
Sounds good. Devin, do you agree with this Jameis Winston pick, or do you have a different cash guy? And make sure that we give the viewers and listeners some FanDuel specific advice. We tend to go a little DraftKings heavy.
Yeah, I agree he's the chalk on DraftKings. I don't agree he's the chalk on FanDuel just because he's 7,400 on FanDuel. And Andy Dalton is 7,500 against Pittsburgh, and I think Dalton's a better play. With all things considering with the same price, Pittsburgh, this pass defense is one of the worst in the league. They've allowed 351 yards and 12 touchdowns to their last four opponents. So you do the math, but it's basically 351 and 3 on average. So Joe Hayden is very hit or miss. He held Julio Jones for a catchless for 3 quarters, but the rest of the secondary is entirely burnable. So Dalton on FanDuel, I think I'm going with. I don't know. Luck's my next guy I'll talk about, but Jameis, I don't trust him, and it's as bad as that is going on the road. It's for some reason, I just don't want to put him in my lineup. I don't like the guy personally, so there is a little bit of a bias, but I agree that the game should be a high-scoring game, but I'm not going there.
You got to overcome those biases, man. I mean, I have a bias against Winston, too, because he was in the lineup that you and I played together at the live finals, FanDuel Live Finals in San Diego, and he did not do me right. So every time I think of Jameis Winston, that's all I can think of. So I'm biased against him as well.
Yeah. Andrew Luck is the other guy I'm looking at. So the Jets' run defense is actually pretty solid, but imagine this. The last 2 weeks, they've allowed Blake Bortles and Case Keenum, and I love Blake Bortles. I think it's pretty well known in this show. Yep. But Blake Bortles isn't the most consistent guy. We'll just put it that way. And Case Keenum's horrible. So 388 yards and 377 yards to Blake Bortles and Case Keenum. Andrew Luck is in a different tier than those two guys. And really, Luck should be able to throw pretty easily against the Jets this week. So he's a guy I'm really looking at. And then finally, Baker Mayfield. So,
oh, no.
Hold on. Mayfield threw for 342 against one of the best secondaries in the league in the Ravens. This Chargers secondary is not the same unit that it was in 2017. So it's more of a GPP play. Let me clarify that. But
okay.
He's a guy at 7,100 on FanDuel that I'm looking at just because this is a Chargers defense that we saw what Mahomes did, and I'm not comparing Mahomes to Mayfield, but the Chargers are allowing 270 yards per game through the air. So they're starting to incorporate David Njoku. They're talking about incorporating Duke Johnson a little bit more. They've been saying that since the preseason, so don't actually believe that. But Mayfield's a guy who can put up 300 yards at 5,500 on DraftKings too. Why not?
Nice. John, who do you got on quarterback here? Break some ties. Offer us some other guys you're looking at.
Yeah, for me, the cash game options on DraftKings this week, I think Winston's going to be my guy. I liked what I saw in his first game out last time. He played a half against Chicago Bears, a good defense, but admittedly in a kind of a garbage time, right? He completed 80% of his passes, and it was a prevent defense. But I liked what I saw there in his first game back this season. And he gets an Atlanta defense this week. Atlanta, the last 4 games, they've allowed 3 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, and 3 touchdowns through the air. The only game they haven't done that was against Nick Foles in week 1 on opening night, that Thursday night game. This just looks like a great spot for him. And on the other side of the ball, and this is why I like Blake Bortles last week against Kansas City. It didn't have to be pretty. You just knew that he was going to get the volume that he needed because Kansas City was going to put up points. And Atlanta's going to do that at home against this Tampa Bay defense. I mean, if Mitch Trubisky can throw for 6 touchdowns, Matt Ryan's got to be able to throw for at least 12. So, if that happens, Jameis will get his. If you don't want to go with Jameis, and I like
the scientist dropping the math knowledge there. Like
in that case, why aren't we just recommending Matt Ryan?
Well, I mean, Matt Ryan is priced up pretty high though for cash games at 6,800. If you can jam him in and feel good about the remainder of your roster, I wouldn't hate that call at all. It's just I don't really like to spend up at the quarterback position because they're much more consistent than the rest of the skill positions. So I try to find something that's a little cheaper. And this week, that's difficult to do on DraftKings. The other guy I like is Jared Goff. He's $200 more. And I think that he's entirely in play if you wanted to go that route. In terms of GPPs, Matt Ryan, we've just mentioned him for all the reasons that Tampa Bay has just been absolutely horrendous in defending the pass. And then the last quarterback I'll mention on a very limited week for me as I'm looking at my list is Deshaun Watson against Buffalo. At home, 10-point favorites. This team hasn't done a whole lot on the ground all year. They've got this, if Kiki QT plays this week, he's running a lot of underneath routes. You've got DeAndre Hopkins who can do just about everything, and then Will Fuller stretching the field. It's a really nice complementary set of wide receivers. You add in Ryan Griffin who can do his own thing. And then, of course, Deshaun can do it on the ground as well. Their implied team total this week is about 26 points, which I don't hate. And I think his price is semi-fair at 6,400. So you could do worse in tournaments than going that way.
And even at 8,100 over on FanDuel, I think Deshaun Watson is in play there, even though he's towards the top of the scale.
Let me ask you guys a question. So, do we really think the Falcons secondary is that bad?
Yes.
They've played – look at their schedule, though. They've played the Steelers, Bengals, Saints, and Panthers over the last 4 games. That's pretty tough.
Agreed.
Yeah, and one that is a good, you got to think of context when you think of these raw fantasy points against numbers. And the other thing that has me a little hesitant about Winston is that, I talk every giving up, receiving. Tampa doesn't have a guy that does that. And that can really help bolster a quarterback's stats. I mean, it's not something we should rely on multiple touchdowns to running backs every week, but it keeps drives going. It keeps scoring opportunities. So I don't know that Tampa's going to get that against Atlanta.
The one risk that they have is that with Tampa not having a running back, to Ryan's point, Atlanta could just come out in the nickel the entire game and force them to run the ball.
Yep.
So, or, even the dime. Like they could just say, all right, we know we can score. We're going to shut down your passing game. So whether or not they can shut it down, but I think that it's a real risk that they may come out and just say, all right, Tampa, we don't believe that you can actually run on us. And it's a little bit narrative-y, but I think that they'll be playing a lot of nickel and a lot of dime this week.
I mean, but nobody's run on them all. I mean, they haven't run on anybody all year. I'm looking at their stat lines. Peyton Barber, his best game all season is 69 yards on the ground. Everything since then has been 20.
I'm saying the Falcons, John.
No, what I'm saying, though, is Tampa Bay hasn't needed to run the ball to be successful. They're still putting points on the board.
The whole argument for Winston, and that was with Fitzpatrick, but the whole argument for Winston is that this Falcons defense is horrible. Well, they could be, but they're also facing balanced offenses in the Steelers, Bengals, like I said, Steelers, Bengals, Saints, Panthers, Eagles that also have a running attack that you have to play more base defense against.
And all those teams had pass-catching running backs as well. And Ronald Jones caught, 17 passes in his whole college career. And I don't think Peyton Barber's that guy either. So I don't know that they have the exact way. I mean, it's nitpicky, John. I mean, Winston
I'm not
first.
saying it's a bad play. I'm just saying it's not a slam dunk that these other games have been in the past.
Atlanta has the better secondary out of those two teams. I'll say that.
I don't think there's a slam dunk at quarterback this week outside of maybe Matt Ryan. Every other quarterback, I think there's a level of risk. So I'll at least buy the premise.
I'm just trying to pick holes at the Winston argument because everyone's going to be on him, and there is risk. Like if you're in a GPP, I wouldn't touch Winston.
Agreed.
Any interest in any of these other quarterbacks in some of these high-scoring games like Ben Roethlisberger in that Cincinnati game? I'm just sort of looking at the list of other guys that we haven't really talked about.
Cam Newton's interesting.
Yeah, okay.
Just because Josh Norman's banged up and Washington's secondary has been – they were good up until we saw what Drew Brees did on Monday night with Norman banged up. So I think Newton is at least intriguing at – what is he, 6,100 on DraftKings, and he has as much upside as anyone in the league as we've seen in the past. So I think his price is a little priced down because Washington's previous 3 games since they've already had their bye. But I think he's intriguing. And then I don't know. I kind of like Russell Wilson if that game shoots out, just because he's 5,700. And when are you going to get Russell Wilson at 5,700? But it's not a lot.
Could have had him at 51 last week. I'm off.
Right.
I'm off Roethlisberger because of the price. He's the top quarterback on FanDuel. He's like 3rd on DraftKings, and we know the home road splits. We know, and now I think Evan Silva and some other fantasy Twitter guys have dissected that even further into 1:00 road splits. And this is also a 1:00 road division if you're into that sort of thing. So there's better options for cheaper
What
dollars.
about the other quarterback in that game?
I like Dalton better.
Yeah.
I mentioned Dalton to start it.
Yeah, that's Devin's cash game guy.
Yeah.
On FanDuel, let me clarify.
On the video version, not to kill the lead or bury the lead, but I talked about Andy Dalton today on the video version of Tips and Picks. I think he's an excellent tournament play on DraftKings, and I will go so far as to say that I agree with Devin that if you want to play him in cash games on FanDuel, that he's a reasonable pivot off of Jameis Winston.
What about Case Keenum against the Rams?
No.
Oh, boy.
He's going to have to throw 50 times.
Yeah, I looked at that earlier. I can't do it. He's just not a good quarterback.
Play Joe Flacco for 300 cheaper.
He's going to have to throw
last week 56 times and didn't get 300 yards. That's what you could be up against with Case Keenum.
Yeah, fair point.
He's thrown for 300, twice this year? No, once, last week.
Time for running backs.
He's going to have to throw a lot.
All right, let's look at some running backs, guys. There's several injuries I'm keeping my eye on here. If you want to see any of our content, go over to footballguys.com. You can find our Week 6 daily fantasy landing page with all kinds of content on it. The running backs I'm looking at here, Devonta Freeman did not practice on Thursday, so we might be back to the Tevin Coleman, Ito Smith split against Tampa Bay in that high-scoring game. Giovanni Bernard is going to be out, so Joe Mixon's going to carry the load here against Pittsburgh. Jacksonville running backs are all kinds of banged up. It's going to be the TJ Yeldon show there. And Isaiah Crowell, coming off that giant game, did not practice Thursday, so we'll keep an eye on that. And then Dalvin Cook could be coming back this week, getting a full practice in on Thursday in a nice matchup against Arizona. And then probably somewhat inconsequential, Lamar Miller looks like he might be coming back full practice on Thursday. John, let me pitch it to you first. Any of these injury situations interesting to you, and who do you like at running back?
I think the TJ Yeldon is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
He's cheap enough at 5,600. I don't know that quite makes a cash game play for me. Dallas is running really slowly again on offense. They tend to drag games out. I just don't know if there'll be enough plays there to make him cash game worthy. But with Corey Grant being out and Leonard Fournette being out, he's going to be a 3-down back. And anytime I can get a 3-down back in a game where I know it's going to be run heavy, I think that it's okay there to go with him at 5,600 on DraftKings. In terms of cash game plays, I think I'm starting and ending with Ezekiel Elliott and David Johnson this week. DraftKings.
Hold on 1 second. I've got TJ Yeldon at 6,400 on DraftKings.
Oh, I have him at the wrong price. I take that back then. It doesn't change his GPP prowess, but
right.
It makes him less of a borderline play for cash. My apologies.
Yeah, no worries.
But with Zeke Elliott, he's $7,000 against the Jacksonville's defense. They're tempting us, right? It's Jacksonville's defense, so we need to avoid them. But he's just a guy that gets way too much volume to be ignored. He's the focal point of that offense. They're not throwing the ball to anybody at this point, so he's the guy I want. And David Johnson at 5,900 hasn't done anything all season, but he's still David Johnson. And on a week where I don't see a whole lot of value, I can give you my two kind of punt plays, but I suspect based on the grimacing that Devin's doing, he's going to throw these out like these are locks. And I'm not so sure. I'd much rather have talent over a punt play for the Indianapolis Colts. But go ahead, Devin. Tell us who you like for cash games.
No,
go for it.
I just don't. Wow. David Johnson is not a name that I would have expected to hear.
Well, in his defense, real quick, before you go through your names, he gave the argument about a 3-down back at 5,600. It was TJ Yeldon. He just meant 5,800 David Johnson because it's the same argument.
Yeah.
It's the same argument. I mean, his usage is good. The way he's used is terrible, but he's still not going to be taken out of the game unless they're down by 40.
I mean,
so there's that.
Yeah, but they have one of the worst offensive lines in the league. Matt Patanti, who's Football Guys expert, as of 27. They're going up against Linval Joseph and Sheldon Richardson. I don't see any way that there's any room. I mean, unless the only thing you're hoping for is David Johnson turns back into old David Johnson and catches 6 or 7 passes. I don't see him having any success actually on the ground going against this defensive line and then the linebackers of Kendricks and Barr. I think he'll really struggle he may have 25, 30 yards rushing. So really you're banking on something that hasn't happened this year, which is him getting back to that 5-6 catch territory. And I don't see it, but
yep.
I mean, he is 3.2 yards per carry this year.
In 15 catches in 5 games.
Yeah, not as much passing work.
So
all right, so who do you like, Devin? Who should you pay up for Todd Gurley? That's the big question.
Yeah, if you can, I think it's wise. It's really hard though. This is a Denver team that is good against the run. I mean, they're stout, but they're struggling against the pass. And the only way I would go with Gurley is if Kupp and Cooks are both out. Just because I think that they will use Gurley as a receiver very frequently, extend the run wide instead of up the middle against this Denver team.
But they both practiced today, right?
It looks like they're moving through the concussion protocol at a good pace. I think they're both going to go, but keep an eye on it.
Yeah. Melvin Gordon is the guy who I'm targeting first in cash. This Cleveland team has really struggled. Their linebacking play of Christian Kirksey and Joe Schobert and who's the third guy? Jamie Collins have struggled against the pass. They've allowed 6 or more receptions to running backs in 4 of their 5 games. Gordon has shown an ability. I mean, he's having a career year at 4.6 yards a carry, and he's catching the ball out of the backfield, which is at a rate that he hasn't done in the past. So he's the guy. We'll talk about defenses and Phillip Rivers' struggles on the road towards the end of the show, but he's the first guy I'm looking at. The other guy that I'm looking at is Marshawn Lynch at home against Seattle at 5,300
in London.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. Even though it's a 1:00 game, it's in London. They threw us a little curveball there.
So doesn't change. Yeah. Okay.
Just saying.
I didn't.
YouTube commenters would have told you if I didn't. So.
Yeah, that's a weird game to have in London. Oakland and Seattle fly halfway around the world. Why not have it in Japan? But
that'd be awesome.
Yeah. So it's a Seattle defense that Lynch has been very good when the game script has been favorable. So he tore up Cleveland in a close game, and he started off good last week and then was benched for the entire second half as they got behind and Jalen Richard came in and they didn't really even try to run the ball. Seattle's allowing 92 yards per game over the last 3 weeks. 5 running backs have gone 71 yards or more against this defense. So I think that Lynch is an intriguing play at 5,300 and at 6,500 on FanDuel. And then Jordan Howard's at 6,200 on FanDuel I think is just too cheap. So he's a guy, and I don't know his DraftKings price off the top of my head.
6,500.
That's too high on DraftKings. But on FanDuel, 6,200 on the road against Miami. I think that the Bears could just grind this out. Mitchell Trubisky's not going to do what he did last week or 2 weeks ago when he threw for 6 touchdowns. I think he's going to revert back to the old Mitchell Trubisky, and they're going to get back to the ground game.
Yeah, Ryan, you were telling us before the show that running back was your trickiest position of the week, trying to figure out who the best plays are. You got any ideas here for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, it's a wasteland. Like, Gurley's 10,000 on DraftKings. He's on the road. Elliott's playing Jacksonville. Melvin Gordon's on the road. David Johnson, we talked. James Conner's on the road, and Cincy has only allowed 3 running backs to go past 50 rushing yards. And we normally want to target home favorites. Well, the home favorites are Cincinnati, tough matchup against the run, and a small favorite. The Jets, which if Crowell sits, great. We've got Bilal Powell. That was one of the guys I'd talk about. Minnesota has a horrible running game, and we don't know who their starter will be right now. Houston, are we going to plug in Lamar Miller? I mean, he's done nothing for us all year. And then Atlanta, which we have now been finding out with named after Judge Lance Ito Smith, that Tevin Coleman doesn't have that whole backfield by himself. No, he really was named after Judge Lance Ito. They said that during the game. It made me laugh so hard. So there's your charity for the week. When Freeman sits, it's not even Coleman's full backfield anymore. And Ito Smith got a last week and scored the week before. So home favorites are nothing. The big guys are all on the road. The game scripts aren't good. The matchups are tough. So, but in GPPs, you're going to have to get off, especially on DraftKings. You're going to have to get away from Elliott and Johnson. Everybody's going to do it. They were the first 2 guys mentioned in the segment. And so if you want to go cheap, I'm surprised Devin didn't mention it because I think Devin thinks the Browns are going to win, and they might. It's only a 1-point spread. Carlos Hyde's getting all the work for them. He's 4,900 on DraftKings. Ooh,
Devin
wow.
hates it.
Okay. Nyheim Hines for Indy is getting all the work there. He has 20 targets.
You're breaking up a little bit, so I'm going to cut you off.
He's played 69 and 67% of Indy snaps in the last 2 weeks. Jordan Wilkins is getting no carries whatsoever there, no touches, no snaps. Nyheim Hines has been getting a lot of love. He's only 5,100 DraftKings, 6,300 FanDuel. And then Bilal Powell is a lock.
I like Bilal Powell, but you're talking too fast and you're breaking your internet, so talk slower.
I'm trying to squeeze it in. Where did I freeze?
Internet is like
He's like the bionic
all right.
man.
Calm down. Talk slower. It's
Carlos
okay.
Hyde, Nyheim Hines, Bilal Powell if Isaiah Crowell sits.
Yeah. Devin, you didn't like the Hyde pick. The others it seemed like you might have been okay with. Why not Hyde?
Yeah, I like Powell the best of the three at home against Indy.
Yeah.
I think this Chargers rushing defense is a lot better than what they were last year. So they get Corey Legit back. Brandon Meebane's playing pretty well. And then the rookie. So, oh God, his name just slipped my mind. The safety. Whatever. The fifth round pick or
for the Chargers.
Yeah. Derwin James. Sorry.
Derwin James. Yep.
He's been a tremendous addition to this rush defense. So it's a much improved unit compared to the one that we just started everyone against last year. I think they're only averaging 4.1 yards a carry this year. So I don't trust the Browns' run defense. I don't trust Carlos Hyde. I think if they win the game, it's because of Baker Mayfield in the passing game.
John, you said you had maybe one or two running back, darts. Have they been mentioned already?
Yeah, Nyheim Hines, I like that call as well. He's a guy I think is borderline cash viable based on his usage recently. I mean, especially on DraftKings is what I'm talking about here. He's I've got him at 5,100. Correct me if I'm wrong, Austin. You got me right. Shy now.
Yep.
But the last 2 weeks he had 9 catches, 63 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. And then last week, 7 catches for 45 yards and, added 15 carries on top of that. He hasn't done a whole lot on the ground, and that's kind of the concern with him, especially against the Jets who, they're not a terrible defense, but I just like the PPR aspect of getting him. And what do we think about the situation in Seattle with Mike Davis and Chris Carson? I know, Devin, you and I had a question this week on Twitter with regards to whether or not we wanted to stack those guys and get all the Seattle carries for 8,600. I think the answer for me on that front is a firm no. But what about going with one of these guys? For me, I think I kind of favor Chris Carson at 4,400 on DraftKings. What do you guys think about Seattle running backs in that game?
Yeah, I like Carson on DraftKings. FanDuel, he's too expensive at 64. Mike Davis is 57, and I guess you could go that route. I don't like running backs Mike Davis, it's hard because they basically flipped roles back-to-back weeks. So could they flip again? Sure. But I think Carson is probably the guy. Is Dalvin Cook going to go?
It sounds like he is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
he got a full practice in on Thursday, so I think that's a big step.
Yeah.
Is there any concern about the footing of the players in London? I feel like whenever I watch that London game, like the field just gets ripped to shreds. I don't know. Maybe that's just like a weird.
I think it's like a bias that just like every time we expect the game to shoot out and it rains a lot there, doesn't it?
That's what I'm kind of getting.
You watch too many British Opens.
Way too much speculation now.
That's way speculation. Okay, that means it's time to move on to wide receivers.
Frank Gore's cheap.
Okay.
And old.
For a reason.
Kenyon Drake's going to be phased out soon, but let's move on.
Oh, man. Wide receivers. We mentioned that the Rams receivers, Cooper Kupp and Brandon Cooks, are going through the concussion protocol, but they did get in limited practices on Thursday. Looks like they're trending in the right direction to play this week. However, for the Washington Redskins, it looks not so good for Paul Richardson and Jamison Crowder. They may both miss this game, which I don't know if you want to go with someone like Maurice Harris or Brian Quick. That may be digging a little deep. but I'm putting it out there.
Brian Quick still plays football?
It's true. I know. I was surprised as well. Ryan, talk to me about some receivers you like. They don't have to have anything to do with these injuries.
Okay, great. Well, we talked, you asked for FanDuel specific plays.
Yes.
So just Mike Evans is priced at wide receiver 3 on DraftKings. He's priced at wide receiver 10 on FanDuel. So he's a great cash game play, almost even at wide receiver 3. I mean, he that's kind of where I was starting. Excuse me, but for GPPs, has a guy as elite as AJ Green kind of ever gone as overlooked as he might this week? You've got Mike Evans, you've got Julio. I mean, Devin won't play Julio, but a lot of other people will. You've got Antonio Brown.
How has that worked out for them?
You've got all these other people at the top.
Julio's price should be 7,400.
Not going to disagree. I'd rather play Green, but it's more GPP play because maybe Evans feels safer and maybe some other guys feel safer. But I'll say this part a little slower so I don't freeze out. But the Steelers are horrible against deep balls, and teams know it. Teams are attempting more deep balls against the Steelers than anyone else except for against the Chiefs. And so they allow the second most deep attempts. Green has the highest ADOT on the team if you're taking John Ross out of the equation, which he only has 15 targets on the year and he's not healthy. And then in Green's last 3 home games against the Steelers, he has averaged 8 catches, 144 yards, and he has 4 touchdowns across the 3 games. That spans back to 2015 because he missed the 2016 game. But, he's got a good history at home against the Steelers. He's an elite player. That target funnel is a little narrow in Cincy now with Eifert out, with Ross hobbled, we know CJ Uzomah is the tight end, but, Cincy is going to get points in that game, at least if you believe Vegas. And I don't know how many of them are going to come from, the running game. So if CJ Uzomah scores twice and my AJ Green play doesn't work, then so be it. But I like AJ Green to sprinkle him into almost any format.
John, did you wiggle signs around there?
Just want to follow up before we move on to other wide receivers, because this is a situation that I initially was really intriguing to me. And the more I looked at it, what do you think? I mean, you're the resident Steelers fan. Joe Hayden went into shadow coverage, which was kind of unusual, and shut down Julio Jones last week. If he does that against AJ Green, number one, can he do it? Because he's been really good in coverage this season. He's only allowed 50% of passes thrown into his coverage. He allowed one touchdown while in coverage this season. He's been pretty darn good. If they shadow him the way they did with Julio, how do you feel then?
Yeah, I mean, I anticipate that they will. And it'd be silly to say that the Steelers defense is not better when Joe Hayden plays. All the stats show that it is. But he's not Jalen Ramsey. He's not 4 years ago Patrick Peterson. He's not somebody I'm just avoiding. I think Atlanta has shown that they'll throw to guys who are open, and they have a number of players, Calvin Ridley, Mohamed Sanu, Austin Hooper last week, who they feel confident in throwing the ball to. I don't know that that's the same for Cincy. I mean, they have Tyler Boyd, they have AJ Green, they have CJ Uzomah. And the Steelers actually, as bad as they are on defense, one thing they do well is they do not allow a lot of receiving production to running backs. And Cincy, throws to Gio Bernard more so than Joe Mixon anyways. So to me, if Cincy is going to score all these points, maybe this game goes under and Green busts. But if they are going to score the points that they're going to score, I think Green's going to be involved. I think you have a 100-yard bonus potential on DraftKings, perhaps a touchdown, half dozen catches. It seems to work. If you believe the Vegas odds, I think Green's a good play, whether Hayden shadows him or not. And I think he would, because it did, quote unquote, work last week. But they didn't even really target Julio that much, and maybe the coverage was good, or maybe other guys were just open. It could be a combination of both.
Or they knew I told you not to play Julio, and Matt Ryan did me a solid, which is probable.
That too.
That's probably
that could be it.
Right.
That's probably more.
Thanks, Matt Ryan, for listening to this show.
But yeah, John. No, that is a good question, John. I've gotten the question a couple of times this week.
Yeah.
But he's the best Steelers corner, but he's not Jalen Ramsey by a long shot.
I can buy that. Yep.
Devin, give me some receivers you like.
What does Mohamed Sanu have to do to raise his price? I mean, honest to God.
Be Julio Jones?
He scored a touchdown in 2 of his last 3 games. In the other game, he had 111 yards.
I think if Julio scores, maybe the Sanu's price might even go down.
I mean, he seems like a lock in every contest at 4,800. I mean, Definitely in cash, and this game is supposed to be a shootout, and we've talked about it, but I'm not going to belabor the point. But to me, he's just simply too cheap, and he's a guy that I plug in pretty much everywhere. I'm going down. I mean, I talked about the running backs I like, and most of them are on the high end, so that obviously means I have to go down. But let's go back to Taylor Gabriel. He has 17 targets in his last 2 games. We saw what he did the last time that he was playing. He had 2 touchdowns. He's 4,300 on DraftKings. You could do worse. More of a GPP play just because he's that deep threat, but he's had, like I said, 17 targets for 4,300 over his last 2 games is pretty good. Corey Davis, it's a tough matchup, but 5,800, he's really impressed me this year. And then the other guy is Jarvis Landry out of the slot. So going up against, I think it's Desmond King, who was good last year, has really struggled a little bit this year and is actually losing some playing time. So Jarvis talked about Baker Mayfield and how much I like him. If you want to go cheap and you don't like Jarvis, go Derek Willis.
Now you're digging deep.
No, I'm not. He had 5. So Rashard Higgins is out.
Right. Fair.
Willis came in the second half and had 5 targets in the second half, including a 39-yard reception to basically win the game. Mayfield talked about his chemistry with Willis when they were on the second team together and practicing on the scout team, etc. So there is a bit of a connection there. They both spent time at Texas Tech, but not at the exact same time.
Now we're stretching.
But I think he's, 3,200? 3,200. If you want Gurley, getting Gurley and Willis for 13.2 combined, if he has 4 for 60, it's a success.
Did you just jump right over Antonio Callaway for any particular reason?
I don't trust Antonio Callaway.
All right, John. Tell me.
Right. I don't even know how to follow up on these.
No, you mean you can't follow Gurley Willis?
Yeah. Which receiver do you trust the least in football?
Callaway played the entire game and has a knee injury and only had 5 targets. Willis played a half, had 5 targets, and is
okay. Yeah. Plus, it's really fun to say Willies. All right, yeah. John, who you got?
Yeah, what I'm hearing here is that this is a tough week at the wide receiver position because there hasn't been a whole lot that I've agreed with to this point outside of Jarvis Landry. I do like Jarvis Landry in cash. I'm not even going to talk about Julio Jones other than to say, Julio Jones again. Whether you hate him or you like him, it's the same thing again this week. So you make your own decision on that front.
I agree with that. So if you liked him last week, like him this week. Like don't take past results out of it. I just never play Julio.
Correct. Yeah, that's basically what I was getting at as well. At the low end, punt plays for cash, and these don't make me feel comfortable. One is Kiki QT. If he's healthy, I think that he's in play at 4,600. And Cole Beasley in Dallas, he's their best receiver this season, and he's kind of pissed off, and he called out his Jason Garrett, if you will, his offensive coordinator, Scott Linehan, whoever, saying that he was only on the field, I think, for 13 passing plays last week and was really upset about it. And he's kind of a leader in the clubhouse. I don't think that this is something that they're going to let just blow over. They're going to get him the ball because he is probably their best receiver. He's only 3,200. Don't expect a high upside. Don't put him in your tournament rosters. But if you need a punt play, I'd much rather go with Cole Beasley than whoever the hell Willies is.
Are we betting something on this?
Cole Beasley versus Willies?
A Beasley Willies wager.
I'm a smart man. I know better not to bet on Cole Beasley. If that's the horse I'm running into.
A drink at the bar for whoever has more points.
All right, they can do that. I'm okay with buying you a cocktail or a beer.
I like that you both picked players from your favorite team. That rarely happens. Yeah. I'm just going to mark the date.
Can I take Juju Smith-Schuster in the same bet? No, that won't work. Okay.
Nice. Good try.
I have one more if John. Well, John's not done.
No, you
go.
You go.
Okay. So it may even be 2 more. The Baltimore wide receivers. Tennessee's numbers in terms of fantasy points against receivers are reasonably good, but they include games against Jacksonville and against Buffalo last week. Without those games, they allowed 100 yards and a touchdown to Alshon Jeffrey. They allowed a 56-yard touchdown to Jordan Matthews, 100 yards to each Will Fuller and DeAndre Hopkins, and 100 yards and 2 touchdowns way back in week 1 to Kenny Stills. John Brown has the most air yards in the entire NFL, which I found, pretty shocking today. So if you're into that kind of advanced stat on air yards, which tends to actually kind of be pretty predictive, more than anybody, more than Julio, more than Antonio Brown, more than Odell Beckham. So, Brown is somebody that is Baltimore's wide receiver 1. He has shown it. Michael Crabtree is a very limited player, but he also has a very low price this week. So Crabtree had 12 targets last week, only caught 6. Had he caught the touchdown that he dropped, we might be thinking of him differently this week. And I think the matchup is better than it shows on paper. So something to think about. Those guys I think are 5,500 for Brown and 4,700 or something like that for Crabtree on DraftKings. So we're looking for value. Might be a good call.
John, you had 1 or 2 more guys real quick?
Just GPP plays. I love Chester Rogers this week since T.Y. Hilton's gone out. He got injured fourth quarter of a game 2 weeks ago. So and they played overtime in that game. So in 5 quarters since T.Y. Hilton has not played, Chester Rogers, 17 targets. This week, he goes up against Buster Skrine out of the slot. Mm-hmm. I pulled this up hoping you would come back to me because slot receivers this year against the Jets, Emmanuel Sanders, 9 catches, 72 yards. D.D. Westbrook, 9 catches, 130 yards. Jarvis Landry, 8 catches, 103 yards. Danny Amendola stunk it up, but he's done that against everybody this season. And then back to week 1, Golden Tate, 7 catches, 79 yards, and a touchdown. Effectively, I'm looking at 20 points there. So you combine the matchup, the volume, the price at 4,500. I love the play in GPPs.
And Devin does not. Why
No,
not?
I like Chester Rogers.
Okay.
I think he's more of a cash game play than a GPP play. I think Ryan Grant's the GPP play on that game, just because he's more of a deep threat. I think Rogers is more an underneath guy. I actually think he's a decent cash game play on DraftKings, just because if you're looking to go cheap, I think he's more of a lock than a lot of people to go, 5 for 54 or 55 yards, which is 10.5 points, which is fine.
Gotcha. All right, let's talk tight ends, guys. There are several injuries here. O.J. Howard is looking not so great, but keep an eye on that. Tyler Kroft did not practice on Thursday if you're into maybe C.J. Uzomah. Greg Olsen looks like he's coming back this week. He got a full practice on Thursday. And then Eric Ebron did not practice on Thursday. Maybe it's Eric Swoop time. And then Austin Seferian-Jenkins is on IR. Maybe if you're digging real deep, you're looking at Niles Paul. No. John, let's talk about tight ends. Who do you like at tight end this week?
I don't like much at the tight end position this week. There's not much to like.
John doesn't like this week.
No, I really don't. I think
it's a bad week.
Because I think that DraftKings, which is where I play the majority of my volume, I think they really priced players well this week, and it's there's not a whole lot of value. Eric Ebron looks great at 5,400. He's getting a slew of targets without Ty, but he's still 5,400, and he's still Eric Ebron.
And he has 4 injuries right now.
Yeah,
4.
Everything is injured.
Yeah, you look him up on Footballguys. It's like ankle, knee bone, this and that. He's got like 3 or 4 different things.
Yeah.
So you're really the guys I'm looking at, and I've been doing this a lot throughout the course of the season, is just punting the position. And we've talked about this guy a number of times. C.J. Uzomah at 3,000 against the Steelers. I think I talked about this on the show last week. The Steelers have been dreadful in defending the tight end position. And Austin Hooper showed them last week. They're going to, same thing's going to happen this week. And then if you really want to go down to the bottom, Ryan Griffin, 2,500, complete punt play, still seeing a lot of targets. That's the way I'll be going in cash. And I think in tournaments, there really isn't a whole lot that I like. I'm not even going to tout anything outside of maybe Nick Vannett against Oakland, because Oakland, again, I'll normalized strength of schedule, Austin Lee on the site, 39% greater than average, Oakland allowing to the tight end position. It's a bit of a noisy stat with tight ends because there's so much variance there. But I think you can do worse than Nick Vannett. I think he's at 2,900 this week. So no issues there in GPPs.
Devin, who do you like at tight end? If O.J. Howard sits, is Cameron Braid in play?
Yeah, FanDuel only.
FanDuel only. Okay, cool.
4,500 on. I think even if Howard plays, Braid is in play at 4,500 on FanDuel, just because we've seen Winston have this connection with Braid that Fitzpatrick really didn't have. So it seems like when Fitzpatrick comes in, Howard is great, and then vice versa. But David Njoku on DraftKings is a guy who I'm looking at, and I like all the Browns this week.
What have you done with Devin?
Except the two that I mentioned.
Callaway. Yeah,
I don't like Antonio Callaway. That's or Carlos Hyde. I really do think that the Browns win the game through the air. So the Browns have made a concerted effort to get Njoku the ball more, and he has 11 receptions over the last 2 games for average of 60 and a half yards. So that's, call it 15 points average over the last 2 games. And he hasn't scored a touchdown this year. So there's a touchdown coming there. When it comes, I'm not really sure. But I think that this is a game where if Joey Bosa was in, I wouldn't like it because they would probably ask Njoku to block a little bit more. But without Bosa, pass rush doesn't really scare me. Melvin Ingram's on one side, but you can double him. So Njoku at 3,700 is more of a GPP play than I would like. I don't know in cash on DraftKings. It's really hard.
Yeah.
It is.
I like the Hooper
Austin
call,
Hooper at 35.
I like the Hooper call at 35.
Yeah. I like Ryan Griffin too. I think there's nothing wrong with just punting it, and he's gonna get 4 for 30.
That's all you want. Just it's opportunity cost. Just don't overspend there. We don't like anything. Punt. Try to get back 2.5 to 3-fold, and use the extra money with players you're more comfortable with in cash.
Yep. I mean, Jeff Hireman is fine too at 2,600. Same thing. You're hoping for that 4 for 57 game he had 2 weeks ago, but there's not a lot that I like on DraftKings.
Yeah. Ryan, who do you like at tight end?
I'm going to mention someone. I'm not sure I could really say I like them.
Your stomach is turning.
And this will be the last time I mention this individual.
I'm just going to put the red sign up.
Yeah, no, everybody put it up. Devin will definitely put it up. And unless this person has a good game, this is the last time we're doing it. Ricky Seals-Jones. He had 0 catches for 0 yards.
You've mentioned him like 3 times this year.
Yeah, I know. I know.
This is your intervention. Stop.
This is it.
Ricky
This is it. He still had 6 targets last week. He still played.
You see how red my face is?
2/3 of the snaps. Is it this red?
Yeah.
But Minnesota has given up a lot of production to tight ends that are not named Gerald Everett and.
Oh, God.
Who's the guy named Kroom for Buffalo? But they have given up a lot of production to tight ends. They do have good corners, so you can argue that there's a little bit of a tendency to want to throw inside against him. He's 2,700. Other than that, what are you looking at? Getting up to 3,500 and higher is hard on DraftKings this week. It is. It's just really tough. I actually feel a little bit more confident in Niles Paul for 2,600 if I had to punt than I do in Ricky Seals-Jones. But Ricky Seals-Jones is a hell of an athlete, and Minnesota, I just noticed that they give up a lot of points to tight ends.
Do you know how many catches career that Ricky Seals-Jones has?
Probably like 4.
22.
And 1 million fantasy points.
Yeah, exactly.
He's that guy that we just want to play every single week because
he is.
Was a 5-star recruit from Texas A&M.
Yeah.
Nothing at Texas A&M, and now he's doing nothing in the pros.
I know. The worst thing that happened was when he caught 3 touchdowns in two games last year. That was the worst thing that could have happened. All right. I like Niles Paul better.
Yeah,
I feel good about neither.
Thank God.
I think that when Devin's hair gets real messed up from seething, that means it's time to move on to defenses. I am going to ask John who he's got at defense this week.
There are some good defenses this week. I think last week
you like
there better be. You hate everything else.
Yeah, well, it's true. But last week I was complaining that there were no defenses, and this week, I guess by virtue of me not liking many of the position players, there's a lot to like. I led off and said, Minnesota and Houston, I think, are the chalk defenses going up against Arizona and Buffalo, respectively. There's a lot of reason to like those teams. They're big home favorites. They're going to get ahead. They've got two young quarterbacks on the opposite side. You put pressure on young quarterbacks to try to make plays, and a lot of times they don't. So if you can afford those, I think they're 3,800 and 3,500 respectively. But if you want to drop down, I've got no issues with the Chicago Bears this week at 3,300. Or even the Baltimore Ravens going up against Tennessee, who I do not trust, and they're a punt play at 2,800.
I like it. Devin, tell us who you like at defense.
I might as well just go all in.
Cleveland
Browns.
Oh, no.
Hear me out.
He's drinking the Kool-Aid.
2,600 on DraftKings.
Yeah.
And 3,200 on FanDuel. They're the cheapest defense on FanDuel.
I'll take them on FanDuel, but
second defense, cheapest defense on FanDuel. The Browns have the most turnovers in the NFL. They have 15 turnovers. The next closest team is 11. It's a defense that, it's a Greg Williams defense, which it's going to try and force turnovers. That's his whole mantra is blitz the quarterback and hope your DBs get interceptions. And so far it's working. And Phillip Rivers on the road at 1:00 games over the last 3 years has one game in which he's had 56% or higher completion percentage. So he's one of those quarterbacks that's really struggled going from west to east at that 1 p.m. time slot. So it's not a love play. It's just the Browns, for how many turnovers, and then Myles Garrett and their defensive line, they're too talented, and I think I've mentioned them every single week this year. They're too talented to be this cheap. It's simply a cheap play. The other team that I like similarly is Dallas, going up against Blake Bortles at 2,300 on DraftKings.
But I thought you loved Blake Bortles.
I love Blake Bortles, but I love Blake Bortles because of games like we saw last week where you don't watch the game. Not pretty.
Yeah.
I made the mistake of watching the game and had a few too many beverages, but his end result was great, right? He ran for a touchdown. I think he threw for 2. He was over 300 yards, but he threw 3 picks, including one that was 4 picks, including one that was the weirdest I've ever seen, which bounced off his own offensive lineman's helmet. So Bortles can turn the ball over, and at 2,300 on DraftKings, it's too cheap.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Bortles is the rare quarterback that has correlation to both his fantasy performance and the opposing defense's performance, both being good. And he's done it he's done it multiple games in every season of his career where they lose by 30, but he's like the QB3 of the week. It's bizarre.
Who do you like at defense, Ryan?
The guys mentioned most of them, so in the interest of time, we can keep going.
Let's move on to stacks. Ryan, do you have a stack that you like this week?
I do, and I kind of mentioned both of these throughout, but Andy Dalton and A.J. Green, I like them. I don't know that you need to necessarily run it back, but you could certainly do so. You could even, maybe play James Conner there too if you wanted to go with a game stack on a high over-under. Joe Flacco, John Brown, really like that too. That one's kind of hard to run back though too because the Baltimore defense is so good. So I maybe like Brown more independently than I do in a stack. And then of course, anything in Tampa, Atlanta, but in GPPs because Winston will be higher owned. Anything with Matt Ryan and obviously not Julio Jones, but any of his other pass catchers that do cross the goal line would be a good stack too.
And if I look at my evaluator tool to compare prices between sites, Calvin Ridley pops to the top of the list on FanDuel. Our algorithms feels like the pricing is very tilted towards playing him on FanDuel instead of DraftKings this week. Devin, who you stacking? Got to be the Browns guys.
I think the stack that I'm going with is Deshaun Watson and Will Fuller. It's a stack that I think people forget about Will Fuller and that he basically scores a touchdown every game. And John's going to give me the red black eye Joe here that John hates Will Fuller, which is fine. But Hopkins has Tre'Davious White, who's gonna go up against him. And outside of Tre'Davious White, the Bills' defense on the road has been pretty porous. You could go Baker Mayfield. I struggle with who. The problem with Baker is I like Landry and Cash. I don't think Landry's upside is high enough in GPPs. So unless you wanted to go Mayfield Willies, you could. I wouldn't necessarily go that way.
Well, what about Njoku? He's too expensive for Cash, and you said he's going to score a touchdown, right?
Yeah, so. That's fine. And then the last one I think I mentioned earlier, but Andrew Luck and Ryan Grant. I think that Ryan Grant gets behind this Jets defense and potentially scores a touchdown.
Nice. Fun calls there. John, who are your stacks?
I think my favorite stack is Andrew Luck, Chester Rogers. Talked about that earlier.
Yep.
I do like Jameis Winston with D-Jax going up against Robert Alford, 5,900. I think that's
love D-Jax.
Yeah.
It's a plus play this week. A lot of people will be on Mike Evans, and you can get a discount and the same type of upside with Deshaun Jackson.
Yep.
Take your pick with the Rams wide receivers. I really don't have a favorite there. If you look at the game logs, the way they use these guys, that's what makes them so tough to defend because you don't know what they're going to do. If you made me choose tonight, I might say Robert Woods against Bradley Roby, but they're all relatively closely priced. And, one of the reasons that makes them attractive is because what I'm describing right now scares a lot of people away from playing them. They know if I take Cooper Kupp, it's going to be Brandon Cooks. And if I take Brandon Cooks, it's going to be Robert Woods. And so as a result, people just avoid them altogether. And I'll be honest and say I do that a lot with the Jacksonville receivers because they're in a very similar situation, except for I have a lot more confidence in the Rams receivers scoring 2 touchdowns than the Jaguars receivers.
Kupp's a clear third there, right?
I'm sorry?
Cooper Kupp's a clear third there with Chris Harris out of the slot.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Yeah, I mean he's probably the last guy, and he's probably the one with the least likely scenario to hit 100 yards as well because of the types of routes that he runs. But I really don't have a problem with any of those, and I think that if I'm not mistaken, Kupp is traditionally the cheapest of the 3 as well, so that's baked in. And then the last one, I'll go opposite Ryan and go with Tyler Boyd. If they do the Joe Hayden shadow thing, Tyler Boyd's going to go on the opposite side. And I think that Ryan would agree that whatever's on the opposite side is far less. And Tyler Boyd, you get him as a discount. He's had 22 targets over the past 2 weeks. So I think you could do worse than him in a tournament play.
Is Adam Thielen going over 100 yards this week?
No, I think they run the ball a lot this week. Arizona's just dreadful on the ground. They don't need to do anything.
Unless they just want to keep the streak alive, which they could very easily just give Thielen 100 yards.
I think it's a Dalvin Cook game.
Yeah, me too.
The line is so bad.
Parting thoughts. Devin, words of wisdom for our listeners.
Yeah, I might just take all my DFS money this week and just put it all on the Browns.
That's what it sounds like. That's where you're headed, man. We're going to have a lot of YouTube comments saying, like, Mike could.
The Browns are going to lose 42-10, which is going to be great. And please roast me in the comment section. Please do it. Like, I read every single comment, and they all make me laugh. So it's
he feeds off of it.
He does feed off of it.
Yeah, don't feed the troll.
Devin is the troll. Ryan, what are your parting thoughts?
Well, I guess one sort of non-serious before a serious one, but you can tell it's a tough week because I counted 5 separate times John said you could do worse. Yeah. So be careful if you don't love your lineups, but maybe shift a little from cash to GPP, but don't maybe go crazy when you don't feel good about it.
I like that.
And then kind of on a more serious note, thoughts and prayers to those in the Southeast, especially here in the Florida Panhandle. I don't know if everybody knows. I live in Florida, not in the Panhandle, thank goodness. But so I've seen my share of these gnarly storms come through, and the images from this one are kind of the worst I've ever seen anywhere. So I know, Austin, you in the Atlanta area had some storms today. Hopefully, but your power's on, so that's good. So nothing in comparison to those on the coast. So
Definitely.
Look at, if you want to do a good deed, if you want to not put all your money on the Browns, maybe look into Red Cross, help out some of my fellow Floridians for that. So thanks in advance for anyone that does.
Yep.
When the Browns win, I'll donate winnings to the cause.
Nice.
Nice. Go Browns. John, parting thoughts.
Well, I mean, I don't even know how to follow all this philanthropy. But, I was going to say what Ryan said when he led off, and that was this, to me, it's Thursday night. Things do evolve throughout the weekend, but it's Thursday night, and I'm looking at cash games thinking it's really tough this week. And as it stands now, I'm fairly certain I'm going to back away from cash games a bit this week. And I don't think there's any shame in doing that. I think it's oftentimes it's smart to know when you think that if you're not comfortable, don't put your chips in the middle. There's no shame in folding a hands. You've got 20 total weeks. This represents 5%. And the opposite of that is also true as I look at Devin and read his mind. If you feel confident, by all means, get your money in the middle. But, the lesson here to be learned is if you don't, there's no shame in backing away.
For our latest DFS content, go to footballguys.com. We'll be back next Friday morning with our Week 7 episode. On behalf of John Lee, Devin Knotts, who's not fired, and Ryan Hester, I'm Austin Lee saying thank you for watching and listening, and thanks for being a football guy. To check out our content at footballguys.com, click the button on Devin's face. To subscribe to our YouTube channel, be sure to click on the button on John's face. And if you'd like to see our latest video, click on the giant video in front of Ryan's face. Click any of those now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.